Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to part 2 of our insight into the Ahlul Bait, which is the descendants of the Prophet Sallallahu with us, we have Sidi Syed Zain Al-Haddad, and Alhamdulillah, in the first part of this series, we talked about his years growing up, his experience as one of the members of the house of the Prophet Sallallahu, and we also discussed some of the concepts regarding how we should perceive as Muslims towards the members of the house of the Prophet Sallallahu, as well as some of the big incidents in the life of Sidi Zain that kind of motivated him to go to Tarim to study. So in this episode, we're going to talk about his time in Tarim. And I just want to start off with a lighter question. We talked about, so now you're in Tarim, right? And you started to study Arabic there. What were some of the most memorable events that you had in Tarim that really shaped your time there?
So nowadays I teach Arabic to adults from time to time, and I find that the greatest element is actually not the book or the app or the dictionary, but the motivation. Because when you read an article in your native language, an academic article, and then now you go to a new language, you learn this word is a book, this word is a pen, this word is a dog, this word is a this. So when I was in my first year there, between Maghrib and Isha, there's a Quran circle. It's the culture in Tarim as well as in the schools. So I was reading Quran in the mosque. I didn't know that junior students like us, Arabic students, would be in the classroom at the back, parked in that corner, just amongst ourselves. You're sitting on a chair instead of on the floor. You're sitting in the classroom instead of the mosque. You're sitting with a bunch of people who don't really read very well, like yourself. So it's quite demotivating, especially after being at the mosque for a few weeks, and then I made a mistake. I should have been in the class. So I went to the class, and there were two circles in my classroom, all my classmates. And then comes in this young guy who's like a senior student, and I'm thinking, wow, they didn't even appoint a teacher. Like, they sent us this young Indonesian, guy. Further demotivation, right? Anyhow, so we only have to read, because we were so basic, we only had to read 3 sentences per turn. And there was 2 circles in that classroom sitting on a chair. And I found that after I got to my turn and I read, and it wasn't fantastic. Like, I know it was, staggered, stammered. And the teacher says very softly, he says, Ahsant, like, very good. And it hit my heart. And then when the second time round that we came to me, he did the same thing again. Ahsant. He wasn't like really listening in like strong like that, but he was just kind of there listening. He's listening, he's monitoring, right? Because he's shuffling between 2 circles. Ahsant. And it really affected me. And that was the beginning of change. Like, wow, like, now I don't hate being here that much. In that classroom, in that Quran circle. And then at the end of the session, I didn't realize that it was for him, it was his first session as well, just like for me, even though semester has gone in for a month. At the end of the session, he sits down in front of class and he says, I went to the madrasah at an old age, he said. I went to the madrasah only when I was 19. Typically, in Indonesia, they go much younger. I went when I was 19. And then I went to read the Quran, and then I went to memorize the Quran. And now I memorize the Quran. Now, nevertheless, you must remember, he's telling the students that for the person who reads the Quran fluently, for him is a deed. For those who read not fluently, for him, the deeds are double. So he really left, and he wasn't like giving a fiery speech, he was just saying it, right? And then he said, thank you very much, inshallah, maybe one day, all of us will improve and for the better. And then he left. And that was enough to change my perception towards that class. And I made that class in that classroom every day, and I forgot about the mosque. So that was one, because, we talk about the big, great sheikhs and all that, but I think we forget it. All of these people in this supporting environment creates people as well, creates epiphanies, and it creates great moments for other people. And that was one of the, I think, life-changing moments that I had in Tarim for sure. And it's a string of others as well. There's a lot, yeah. It's a place where the streets teach you, even though you're not learning.
Mashallah. Was it memorable because that was really like the introduction to the spirit of Tarim? Why people love Tarim?
Yeah, I'd say that's part of it, because the point being is that I think they like to make religion easy for people. It's always about making things easy, and not about making things difficult. So I think the challenging things are for those people who are ready for it, people who have, their teachers know them well and feel like, okay, now I can tell this boy this and I can guide. It's part of guiding them. But it has more to do about inspiring people rather than saying making them do something. So uplifting them a lot.
Mashallah. Then, let's just fast forward into your journey in studying Tarim, right? how was studying? How was life like in Tarim? And what changed the insight in you? You know, or your time spent in Tarim, everything that you've learned. How did it change you as a person?
So before I started piecemeal in 2012, and then 2014 I moved to Tarim. Before that, in 2008, I was running a bizarre participatory arts group, and like until I left for Tarim, I was still running it. And that arts group achieved, I think, a fairly amount of success and publicity in the country, and somehow it made me this youth leader and whatever. The things that I did over there was fast, quick, and big. The arts group, and it did achieve success. But I saw shortly after how things would fall and crumble afterwards, because it was fast, quick, and big. You're not really having building blocks for building basic structure in terms of building your organization, building the ideas, building the people, building the adab, building the knowledge. It wasn't there. So I saw that, and I was also running piecemeal the Da'wah group in similar fashion in a way. But only after I went to Tarim that I saw that, look, great things take a long time to build. And people take a long time to change as well, can take a long time to change. So I felt, one of the things that I learned definitely was how to learn how to be patient and just take it easy. And a lot of people don't connect this, but I think patience has also to do with the aqidah we have towards Allah. That, really everything is in His power. That it's easy to want to do X, Y, Z because I know if I do X, I get Y. I know if I do Y, I get Z. But it doesn't always work that way. You may work that way, but not in that timeline. So I think Tarim, when I saw how the teachers were treating the students, I remember that I had some classmates that would always come late, they were always asleep, they always talk a lot. And some teachers rarely scolded them. And even when they did, after that boy had come to class on time after a few lessons, the teacher gave general advice about the importance of being on time. And I doubt that boy got it. But because to him it was so important to make sure that this boy doesn't feel hurt in halakah, in an Islamic environment, in a circle of knowledge. Right? Yes, we want him to be on time. But it was more important that we're not trying to get him to be on time. What's more important is that we raise him to be a good human being. And that meant that the risk of offending him, the risk of siding him in a certain way that he might be disappointed with either scholars or the book or the students or the mosque or the environment is far greater than having him to come on time. So I better find a way to advise him in a nice, subtle way that might inspire him and that might correct him as opposed to potentially offending him in front of everyone. Now, that people might say, yeah, of course you don't want to offend a person. People say that a lot, but we end up doing that when we give advice to other people. So they're very careful they're very patient about it, and because they see the bigger picture. And because the objective is very clear, to bring people to Allah, not to bring that boy on time. Yes, we want him to be on time, but that's not the main objective. The main objective is to guide this child, or boy, or adult, or man, to get closer to Allah. And if it means that I have to be patient and hold back about scolding him about being on time, then I will do so. I will have to find the best way to do it so that secondarily, I get the outcome of him coming on time, but primarily he gets a step closer to Allah, a step closer, or 10 steps, or 100 steps closer. That's the objective. That's the point above all else. Yeah.
Do you think this concept that you mentioned, everything coming from, number one, like your understanding of Aqidah and Tawheed, and then thereafter putting and prioritizing the feelings of people first and foremost. And I think I recall one of the narration of the Prophet, he pointed to the Kaaba and he mentioned that you are not as important as the emotions of my ummah, right? So here in Singapore and also by extension in KL, you mentioned some of the initiatives that you also had started. Here in Commerce Central as well, we try to build a community. Do you think we can emulate the culture there in Tarim? And do you think this is applicable in our context? And what can we do to get there?
I think if you the more important point about the Tarim culture and tradition is more about the batiniya rather than the zahiriya. It's more about the inward rather than the outward, which is having a good opinion of people, being patient with people, having respect for other people, being tolerant of other people. And that And really, what they are doing, what have been doing, is to emulate the prophetic culture and tradition. So that's fine to want to emulate that, want to do that. But I think the outward aspect has its time and place, and I think we look to the scholars to guide us what is applicable and what's not applicable, and when is that applicable, and how is it applicable. But with regards to the other parts, I think the inward character is what counts the most. Yeah.
I'd like to ask as well, then looking back on your entire time in Tarim, and you're still staying there right now, what do you think is the biggest takeaway that you've gotten in your entire journey and of seeking knowledge there? And what was one thing that really impacted you the most in your time in Tarim?
I think there's too many to think of and to mention, because it's like when you're trying to nurture a tree and get its fruits, you water it every day, and you get the breeze, and you get the pollen, and the other insects and the other things that come around that tree that mixed up that tree. So it's often never one thing. But I think the rahmah of the scholars and their patience towards the people who learn from them, both the public and the students, the emphasis on husnul dhan, having a good opinion on other people, is intensely intense, I would say, over there. To not assume bad of another Muslim. And also, I think the simplicity of how Islamic spirituality there is practiced, or the essence of excellence of Islam is practiced, is very beautiful there. Yeah.
When you then, completed your studies in Tarim and you came back to KL, did you feel like because you had gotten the opportunity to study there and you completed your studies there was a greater responsibility for you to contribute back to the society? And in that vein, do you feel like with more knowledge that we acquire, there should be more amanah for us to contribute to the people around us?
First of all, I don't think so. Even if you do the full 10-year program for Darul Mustafa, and for other schools might be different, I don't think so you'll ever complete studies. I think we spoke about this, that's a rather different concept, because seeking knowledge is more of a life pursuit. And nor did I complete the program. 90% of people don't complete the program, for like a better word, if you want to dwell on this thing of completion of program. I think the amanah increases for everyone. As time passes, everybody gains age and experience, so it gains. You have a greater amanah, whether or not you went to Tarim or not, whether or not you're a man or woman, that you had, the more you gain from society, the more your amanah would increase. But yes, there is definitely a narrative there, which is to convey what you've gained, however little, like even if it's, Prophet says, even if it's an alphabet, a harf, an ayah, a verse. So the amanah is definitely there, and the conversation about it is definitely active. And I think it's unfortunate that we don't have that conversation in outside that, like even in westernized urban settings like this. When somebody, for example, if somebody, now you see it less, but I think it still exists when people put something in a WhatsApp group. For example, they share a hadith or they share an advice or counsel, and then they say, just sharing, and then I'm not preaching. Like as though it's a bad thing to preach. Again, another alien idea in Islam. Like people say, I'm not preaching, I'm just sharing this video. What's so bad about preaching? Did the greatest man ever live and created, was he not a preacher? Should we not be proud to be preaching? I understand that because in the West, preachers are not seen as a welcome character in the environment. Yeah. But why? How then did we make that our base? So yes, there is an amanah, but preaching also I think comes in many different manifestations. And I think this might sound a little harsh, but people grow up and they mature, but a lot of people don't really mature. I think if you don't understand that you have a duty that people depend on you as you grow up, whether or not you're in Islamic environment or not, then I think there's a lack of maturity there.
And before we conclude this podcast and we move on to some of the questions that we might want to answer from our converts in the community, I wanted to ask, do you have any advice for one who aspires to seek knowledge or one who might aspire to eventually head over to Tarim to further their studies? What advice would you give them?
I think I won't answer the second part about Tarim because I don't think so. It is about Tarim per se. I don't think so. It's about because that's again our teachers that that's not supposed to be our objective. It is not our duty to promote people to come to Tarim, to come to our school to learn from our teachers. No, we promote people to go to Allah and His Messenger. In fact, when you are in Darul Mustafa, the school, and you may go out to local villages to do da'wah work, you are explicitly prohibited from mentioning Tarim, from mentioning the names of your teachers, from mentioning your school. Explicitly prohibited from mentioning Habib Umar and his peers and so forth. Because your job is to guide people to Allah and His Messenger. And this prohibition came from Habib Umar. So that's regarding the second question about going to Tarim. But I would say regarding seeking knowledge, again, I might not be in the best position. Even Shaykh Umar al-Hussein al-Khatib, who's the most senior teacher now in Darul Mustafa, he calls himself as one of those that resemble the students of knowledge. He's the Shaykh, he doesn't call himself the student of knowledge, he says one of those people that resemble the student of knowledge. So who am I to give advice regarding seeking knowledge? But I do think that number one, seeking knowledge does not have to be a grand thing in the context of its format. Right? I know a brother that used to, all he did was that every day after lunch with his family, he would open a small hadith book, small in size, and just read 3 hadith. He would read one hadith, his wife would read 1 hadith, and the child would read 1 hadith. And the next day they do another 3. And when they're done, they repeat the whole book again. Right? And that's seeking knowledge as well. And then some people that I've met every day before they eat lunch or dinner, they open up, they read a small passage, literally just like 15 seconds, that's all they do, and then they put the book aside. That's part of seeking knowledge as well. It doesn't always have to sit down for 1 hour, have to study, or have to enroll in some course. It doesn't have to be that. Because if it was that, imagine the people who don't have access to that. That means it's Allah's mercy so narrow that they don't have access to that just because where they live, there's no course, there's no semester, there's no madrasah. Allah's mercy is very vast, time and time again. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is the most merciful, the most graceful. So the path of knowledge is very wide and vast, and Allah grants knowledge into the hearts of men in a way that they don't know. So that's my advice, which is it is a grand affair, but don't make the format a grand affair. It's very simple and nice and simple. It's meeting with friends, speaking about knowledge, all that is part of the pursuit. What's in the heart really counts. Yeah.
MashaAllah. Thank you for sharing your advice and your experiences in Tarim. This is something that is new to even myself to have you on the podcast and talk about experience. So really appreciate it. Inshallah, in the next episode, we'll talk a little bit about some of the commonly asked questions that we get from the community. And we have a segment called the quick fire questions that we normally ask our guest speakers. So it's really just a simple questions and answers thing where you get to answer our questions in about 3 to 4 sentences. So inshallah, that will be in part 3 of this week's series. And we'll catch you there inshallah.